Continued harassment by craving. For many people, however, the mind does not function in this way. In the case of a tree or something else in nature, the mind may be easily receptive to kindness, but in relation to other people, this tends to be more difficult. Craving in one form or another frequently interferes with or overwhelms the wholesome state of mind. For example, when one sees a healthy and vigorous person with a graceful body, if the person is of the opposite sex, instead of rejoicing in the person's well-being, craving incites one to see the person as a source of personal pleasure. And if the person is of the same sex, one tends to feel that he or she is an impediment or threat to the sense of self, causing one to feel inferior and reducing one's self-importance. Instead of having an open, generous and cheerful mind endowed with loving kindness, one's sense of self feels impacted, and the mind is confined, stressed and tainted by craving. One harbours infatuation, lust, envy, jealousy or malice, all of which are unwholesome, turbid and uncomfortable states of mind, forms of mental illness and obstructive to oneself and others. A guideline to verify whether one's love for another person is true metta or is metta mixed with craving, or simply a symptom of craving, is to ask oneself these questions. If I am unable to derive pleasure from this person, or if his or her existence no longer bolsters a sense of self-security, will I still love this person? Will I still value and cherish him or her? Will I still delight in his or her well-being? The love of parents for their children is a good benchmark for metta. Parents generally love their children, delight in their well-being, and want them to be prosperous, happy, and free from danger. The parents experience this love without viewing their children as a source of pleasure, and regardless of whether their children's lives reinforce a sense of self-security. However, the parents are still unenlightened, when the parents are still unenlightened, craving tends to infiltrate and taint the parents' love to some extent. Their love is not completely pure, as is evident in the common attachment of "these are my children, they belong to me." Most parents still hope that their children will help to increase self-security or self-importance. For example, they want their children to have a high social standing so that they can be proud and share in the prestige. Or they fear that their children will lose social standing and thus they themselves will be shamed. A slight attachment is normal for unawakened people, but if it expands and controls the entire behavior of a person, then it can cause considerable damage. From this perspective of metta, the important point is that the love is unconditional. The parents love the child regardless of whether he or she boosts their sense of self-importance. When the child is abandoned by everyone else, the parents continue to provide love and support. When conflict arises between their children, someone else, parents tend to feel indignant towards the opposing party and are biased towards their children. They are unable to consider the issue in a truly objective way because their love is still mixed up with craving. The love still gives rise to a division between the loved and the not loved, and thus still causes problems and causes suffering. An understanding of metta helps to increase an understanding of chanda, because both of these qualities concern the subject of love and desire, and they are both wholesome and pure, both wholesome, pure, and supportive to the mind. There is a distinction, however, between these two qualities. The term chanda has a broad definition and can be applied universally, whereas the term metta technically has a more narrow definition and pertains specifically to a person's relationship to living creatures, to animals and other people. Living creatures are the objects Ramana of loving kindness. In addition, metta, along with the other three divine abidings, Brahma Vihara, relies on chanda, specifically Katu Kamyata Chanda, as a foundation or as a primary agent. Review of wholesome desire. The former example of a person delighting in the healthy state of a tree without the interference from selfish desires was a way to introduce the subject of loving kindness, metta, but in fact it accurately describes the quality of wholesome desire, chanda itself. Loving kindness begins from wholesome desire, but technically it is confined to a person's relationship to other people and animals. Chanda, on the other hand, can be applied to everything, and thus the discussion of chanda is more wide-reaching. Chanda is a satisfaction in and wish for things to exist in an optimum or ideal way. It is a delight in the integrity of things, the wish for all things to exist in a wholesome, correct, prosperous and complete state. Chanda includes a desire to act in order to bring about this state of wholesomeness. And integrity. One wishes for those benefits that arise directly from specific actions in line with causes and effects, rather than wishing for those advantages that feed selfish gratification. We can ask how those people endowed with this virtuous state of mind would respond if they were to encounter the following situations: a filthy floor in a house, a public place littered with rubbish, school desks in a cluttered mess, withering trees, a potholed road, a destitute child in tattered clothes, an ill person with no nursing care, areas with widespread theft and persecution, drug addiction, rampant gambling, a lack of attention to education, rudeness and insensitivity, lack of harmony or unrighteous behavior. Similarly, how would they respond to encountering these conditions? A clean, well-ordered place, a shady, refreshing grove of trees, a harmonious community, or a peaceful, contented person. Chanda is a love of virtue, wholesome conditions, and a good quality of life. For example, cleanliness, orderliness, tranquility, a natural countryside, and a healthy, refreshing environment. This state of mind is pure. It does not require a desire for sense pleasure or an involvement by selfish thoughts and preoccupations. Such a state of mind does not arise independently or randomly, but requires reason and understanding. This is opposed to the perpetual stream of ignorance and craving, which requires no reflection. The love of goodness, or the ability to determine what is good, relies on an understanding of the value or truth of things, unlike the stream of ignorance and craving, where a person encounters pleasure and pain, and then suddenly and impulsively experiences like or dislike. To give rise to chanda, a person must apply wise reflection to sever the stream of ignorance and craving, and replace it with a cessation cycle in the end of ignorance and craving. Wise and skillful reflection may be needed merely to steer a person's thinking in a proper direction towards a course of wholesome desire, or it may involve a great amount of consideration, analysis, inquiry, and reasoning. When wise reflection arises, the stream of ignorance ends. When the mind sees the value of something, it naturally inclines towards and engages with it without the need for force or enticement. At this stage, perseverance arises, an effort to produce, establish, and fulfill that wholesome thing, wholesome state. In some situations, the Buddha revealed intermediate subsidiary factors in this process. For example, in the Kitagiri Sutta and the Kanki Sutta, he presented the sequence of stages in Dhamma practice, beginning with faith and ending with the realization of the highest truth. The stages that are relevant to this discussion are that when a person has listened to a Dhamma teaching and memorized it, he examines its meaning. When he examines its meaning, he gains an understanding that accords with the subject of contemplation. With such an understanding, chanda arises, and with chanda, perseverance, etc. The stage of examining the meaning of the teachings is precisely the stage of wise reflection. The understanding according with the subject of contemplation is the result of this examination, and these two stages comprise the application of wisdom. When a person discerns and understands the goodness and value of something, chanda arises. The mind inclines towards, delights in, and desires this thing. In some, wise reflection leads to wholesome desire, which then leads to perseverance.